Endless thanks and praise be to Allah Almighty, who created us and all things, and may His peace and blessings be upon His beloved Messenger. Uzzaman Said Nursi was born in 1873 in the village of Nurs, in the district of Hizan and sub-district of Isparit, in the province of Bitlis in eastern Turkey. His fortunate father, Mirza Effendi, was so God-fearing and dignified that rather than having to take things from others, he himself grazed their animals. He would even muzzle the cattle on the journey to and from home so that they should not eat from other people's fields, thus making their produce unlawful. In this way, Mirza lived an active, self-respecting life, certain of feeding his children only what was lawful. The young Sayyid's mother, Nuriya Hanum, began her son's education when he was only a year old. She had a powerful influence on the child, for when 80 years of age, Uzzaman said this about his mother: "In my lifetime of 80 years, I have received instruction from 80 people. Yet I swear that the truest and most unshakable lessons I have received, which have always retained their freshness, have been those inculcated in me by my late mother. For they were as though planted in my very nature, and physical beings like seeds. I see now that the other instruction has been constructed on those seeds. This means that the lessons my late mother instilled in my nature and spirit when I was 1 year old were fundamental seeds among the great truths that I now see at the age of 80. I see with complete sincerity, for instance, that it was from the compassion I learned from my mother's conduct and manner that I have taken compassion as the most important of the four main principles of my way, and kindness and sympathy, which also constitute the greatest truth of the Risale-i-Nur." But Uzzaman remained under the guidance of his dignified father and kindly mother till he was 9 years old. The lessons most deeply implanted in him he learnt in his father's house. There then awoke in him the desire to study, and he went in succession to the medrese, or religious school, in the village of Tar, to the summer pastures of the Hizan Sheikh, and to Nurshin. However, he could not endure to be dominated and spoken down to by some of the other students, and returned home. Sometime following that, he dreamt of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be blessings and peace, and was told in reply to his request for knowledge, "Knowledge of the Quran will be granted on the condition that you ask no questions to anyone of my community." Fired with enthusiasm by this auspicious dream, he requested his parents' permission to continue his studies. After remaining a short period in Gevash, he set off for Dol Bezid and the Medrese Sheikh Muhammad Jalali. Here he studied intensively for 3 months and completed the course that normally could be completed only in 20 or so years. He committed to memory the basic texts of 80 books and received the spiritual effulgence of the local saint and wali, Ahmed Ihan. From there, the young Sayyid went to Sheikh Mehmed Emin Effendi in Bitlis, and after a short stay, travelled on to his brother, Molla Abdullah, in Shirvan, and from there he went to Siirt to Molla Fetur Effendi. These two latter scholars tested Bedi Uzzaman on the subjects he had studied, and he replied perfectly to all their questions. In Siirt, he memorised in a week the 4-volume work Jam al-Jawami. He also memorised verses from Maqamat al-Harira by simply reading them once. These learned teachers were left in astonishment at the level of intelligence and power of memory they found combined in one person. From Siirt, Bedi Uzzaman moved on to the village of Tilo, Aydınlar. Here he stayed for 3 months in a small domed building on a hilltop outside the village, Kubiya Hasya, where he memorised an Arabic lexicon called the Kamus al-Okyanus, as far as the 14th letter of the alphabet, Sin. He used to give the pieces of food in the soup he received every day to the ants, while he himself made do with bread and the liquid. When asked the reason for this, he would reply, "I have observed that they have a social life and work together diligently, and I want to help them as a reward for their republicanism." While in Tilo, Bedi Uzzaman dreamt that Sheikh Abd al-Qadir Gailani told him to go to Mustafa Pasha, the chief of the Miran tribe, to advise him to give up his tyranny, perform the obligatory prayers, and command what is right, otherwise he was to kill him. So he set off for the Miran tribe, Because the tribal leader knew of Mullah Said's fame, he told him that he would set up a contest between him and the religious scholars of Jizre. If you defeat the scholars, he said, I'll do what you say and perform the prayers. But if you can't beat them, I'll throw you in the river. He arranged for the contest to be held at the place called Bani Han on the banks of the Tigris. But Uzzaman answered correctly the 40 questions prepared by the scholars and won the contest, whereupon Mustafa Pasha gave him the Mauser rifle he had promised him and began to perform the prayers. In Mardin and Bitlis, Uzzaman was involved in a number of political and social matters that were contrary to Islam. For instance, on one occasion he opposed some officials who were drinking alcohol and gave them a stern warning. Following this, he was exiled to Bitlis by the governor. In the 2 years he remained in Bitlis, Uzzaman memorised around 40 works on the Islamic sciences, including Matali, Mawakif and Mirkat. Every day he would recite a portion of them from memory, and it would take 3 months to go through the lot. On the invitation of Hassan Pasha and Tahir Pasha, he left Bitlis for Van, where he began the study of the modern physical sciences. Through his own efforts, he learned such sciences as history, geography, mathematics, geology, physics, chemistry and astronomy. He held scholarly debates with teachers of chemistry and geography. While in Van, Tahir Pasha showed him some shocking news in a newspaper. In the British Parliament, the Secretary of the Colonies, Gladstone, had held up a copy of the Holy Quran and said, "So long as the Muslims have the Quran, we will be unable to dominate them. We must either take it from them or make them lose their love of it." This provoked an overwhelming response in Uzzaman, causing him to declare, "I shall prove and demonstrate to the world that the Quran is an undying and inextinguishable sun." In 1907, Uzzaman left to Istanbul to win support for the university-type medrese he wanted to found in Van and Diyarbakir, called the Medrese Zehra. He rented a room, Sheikh Jihan, in the Fatih district and hung a notice on his door which said, "Here all questions are answered, all problems are solved, but no questions are asked." The famous scholars of Istanbul and groups of students came to visit him and ask him various questions, all of which he replied to unhesitatingly. It was at the time that Istanbul Ulma gave him the name of Uzzaman, which means wonder of the age. Uzzaman was arrested during the 31st of March incident in 1909 and sent before the court-martial. The chief judge of the court, Hushrid Pasha, accused him angrily. "You too wanted the Sharia mixed up in this affair." Displaying not a trace of fear, Uzzaman unwaveringly replied, "If I had 1,000 lives, I would be ready to sacrifice all of them for a single matter of the Sharia. For the Sharia is the source of prosperity and happiness, and true justice and virtue. But not like those who revolted wanted. Yes, I have committed 11.5 crimes. He then went on to describe all the services he had performed for the country, and asked the court if those were crimes, so that he had been sent before it. He delivered an awe-inspiring defence, following which he was acquitted. Offering no thanks, he turned on his heel and strode out of the court shouting, "Long live hell for all tyrants." But Uzzaman did not remain long in Istanbul. He set out for Van by way of Batum and Tiflis. In Tiflis, he climbed Sheikh Saman Tepe, the hill overlooking the city, when he was approached by a Russian policeman. The following exchange ensued, which began with the policeman asking, "Why are you studying the land with such attention?" But Uzzaman replied, "I am planning my medrese." "Where are you from?" "I'm from Bitlis." "But this is Tiflis." "Bitlis is one of Tiflis's brothers." The policeman was bewildered. "What do you mean?" But Uzzaman explained, 3 lights are beginning to be revealed one after the other in Asia and the world of Islam. While with you, 3 layers of darkness will start to recede, one over the other. This veil of despotism shall be rent, it will shrink back, and I shall come and build my medrese here. This only increased the policeman's bewilderment. "I'm sorry for you," he said. "I'm astonished that you should entertain such a hope." "And I'm astonished at your not understanding," replied Uzzaman. "Do you think it possible that this winter will continue? Every winter is followed by spring, and every night by day." But the Islamic world is broken up and fragmented. They have gone to study. It is like this. India is an able son of Islam. It is studying in the high school of the British. Egypt is a clever son of Islam. It is taking lessons in the British school for civil servants. Caucasia and Turkestan are two valiant sons of Islam. They are training in the Russian War Academy, and so on. You see, after these noble sons of Islam have received their diplomas, each will lead a continent, and waving the banner of Islam, their just and mighty father, on the horizons of perfection, they will proclaim the mystery of pre-eternal wisdom inherent in mankind, in the view of pre-eternal divine decree and in the face of obstinate fate. After his arrival in Van, Uzzaman travelled around the neighbouring tribes, attempting to teach them about the positive aspects of civilization. What is true freedom? What should it be enacted? How should constitutionalism be regarded? What should the saints, sheikhs and rulers be like? How should the physical and religious sciences be developed? And how should they be taught to the younger generation? He explained that schools should be opened that taught both the religious and modern sciences. He subsequently published a book containing all these questions, entitled Munzirat, The Debates. From Van, Uzzaman made his way to Damascus. Here he delivered a sermon in the Umayyad Mosque to 10,000 people, among whom were 100 religious scholars. His address was afterwards published under the title The Damascus Sermon, Hutbeh-i Shamiyah. The sermon not only sets out the reasons for the disastrous situation of the Islamic world at that time and offers the solutions to deliver it from its predicament, it also announces glad tidings that Islam would progress to a position of dominance in the world. It is a highly valuable address, relevant also to the Muslims of today. Uzzaman then returned to Istanbul to get backing for his university in the east, Medresetu Zehra. He joined Sultan Reshad's retinue during the Sultan's Rumelia journey. In Kosovo, a large university was to be founded, but the Balkan War broke out and the attempt came to nothing. Uzzaman persuaded Sultan Reshad and the leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress that as the centre of Islamic world, Eastern Anatolia was in greater need of the university, and he requested that the 19,000 gold liras allotted to the Kosovo University should be reallocated to Eastern Anatolia. His request was accepted, and the foundations of the Medresetu Zehra were laid out at Edremit on the shores of Lake Van. However, the First World War broke out soon afterwards, and the project had to be abandoned. Uzzaman armed his students and joined the war as commander of militia forces. When the Russians were advancing into Anatolia, Uzzaman and his students held them at Gevshas so that the fleeing people of their families should not fall into Russian hands. Thus the people of Van were saved from slaughter. When the Russians occupied Van and Bitlis, Uzzaman and his students rescued 30 large guns, preventing them from being seized by the Russians. They thus again held up the Russians, and at this time saved the people of Bitlis from massacre. In the front lines during the fighting, he would dictate his Quranic commentary, Israt al-Ijaz, to his student and scribe Habib. In Bitlis, Uzzaman broke his ankle, falling into a water conduit. He remained 33 hours in the water till he was taken prisoner by the Russians. He was sent to Kostroma on the river Volga by way of Van, Julfa and Tiflis. He spent 2 years in Kostroma as a prisoner. While in the prisoner of war camp, the commander-in-chief of the Russian army came on a tour of inspection. All the prisoners rose to their feet except Uzzaman. When asked why he did not stand, he replied, "I'm a Muslim scholar. There is faith in my heart. A person of faith is superior to a person without it. If I had risen to my feet, I would have been disrespectful to my beliefs. That was the reason I did not stand up." The decision was taken to send him before the court-martial for insulting the Russian army, and indirectly the Tsar. The court ruled that he should be executed. When he was informed of this, he replied, "Their decision to execute me is a passport for me to travel to the hereafter." Due to his courage, he attached no importance to it and said that he would be ready after performing 2 rakats of prayer. The commander-in-chief was overcome with remorse and apologised, saying, "Forgive me. I thought you behaved as you did to insult and I acted accordingly. Now I realise you were merely acting as your beliefs required. Your sentence is quashed. You should be recommended for your firmness of belief." once again I apologise. After 2 years as a prisoner, he escaped on his own with no knowledge of the Russian language, covering a distance in a few days that normally would have taken months on foot. He returned to Istanbul by way of Warsaw and Vienna. On his return, on the recommendation of the army, he was awarded a war medal for his services during the war and appointed to the Darul Hikmetul Islamiyya, the highest learned institution. His appointment to the rank of Marek was decreed by the Caliph and announced by the Sheikh al-Islam. When Istanbul was occupied by the British, Uzzaman attacked them fiercely and insultingly in a short work called The Six Steps. If they had captured him, they would have executed him, but he was saved by Allah's grace. The Ankara government was set up at this time, and they invited him to Ankara insistently. When he finally went there, he was given an official welcome in the assembly and was requested to offer prayers. He offered the prayers, but he saw that most of the deputies in the assembly did not perform the obligatory prayers, and because of their infatuation with Europe, were as though falling away from Islam. He published a 10-point brochure by way of admonition. Uzzaman was offered a deputyship in the assembly, membership of the Directorate of Religious Affairs, and the post of General Preacher in the East in place of Sheikh Sanusi. He was also allotted a residence, but he accepted none of these attractive offers. He saw that the awesome persons foretold in the hadith of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to appear at the end of time, had appeared, and understood from this that, if you live to that time, they will not be overcome by means of politics. They will be confronted only with the lights of the Quran and the spiritual swords of the Quran's miraculousness. In compliance with this, Uzzaman took the train for Van, where he retired to a cave he had dug at the source of Zaranabad River on the slopes of Mount Erik. Knowing the attachment to Uzzaman of the tribes in the Van region and their willingness to obey him, the government of the time ordered that Uzzaman should be taken from this cave by gendarmes and, as a precautionary measure, sent into exile in western Anatolia. He was sent first to Burdur, then to Isparta, and finally to the remote village of Bala. Bala was the first place to see the writing of the Risale-i-Nur, which was sent to assist and encourage people of belief. It was the place of a light of guidance. A sun of happiness rose proceeding from the Quran to confront an awesome current of misguidance and irreligion that was overwhelming the people of Islam, and especially the people of Anatolia. The intention of the enemies of Islam in exiling Uzzaman to this isolated village was to prevent him speaking out and writing works about Islam and belief, and to compel him to remain idle and give up the struggle to serve the Quran. Uzzaman, however, did just the reverse of this. Never spending an idle moment, he wrote the Risale-i-Nur, which teaches the truth of the Quran and belief, and disseminated them secretly. In 1934, he was sent from Bala to Isparta. On the 27th of April 1935, he was arrested in Isparta and was transported handcuffed by lorry together with 120 of his students to Eskişehir. Despite being kept in solitary confinement and being subjected to every sort of torment, he wrote the 13th Flash and the first and second rays. No evidence could be put forward for their conviction, and completely arbitrarily, he was sentenced to 11 months imprisonment. 15 of his students were sentenced to 6 months, while 105 of them were acquitted. Uzzaman was released from Eskişehir prison on the 27th, 1936, and was sent to Kastamonu, where he was ordered to reside in the police station. After a short stay here, he was settled in a house opposite the police station. He passed 8 years of exile here under close surveillance and severe repression, but again he was never idle and continued the secret publication of the lights of the Quran. Here he wrote the third ray, called A Supplication, and the inspired seventh ray, known as the Supreme Sign. He kept up a constant correspondence with his students in the Isparta area. The illuminating letters he wrote them and some of their replies were put together in the collection called Kastamonu Bahikası. On the 20th of September 1943, Uzzaman was sent from Kastamonu to trial in Denizli Criminal Court, together with 120 of his students. He was tried for organising a secret society and founding a Sufi order. A committee of experts scrutinised all of his works and gave a favourable report. Uzzaman presented a masterly defence. On the 16th of June 1944, Dennisley Court ruled that they should be acquitted. Decision number 199/136. This was ratified by the Appeal Court on the 30th of December 1945 and made final. But Uzzaman and a number of his students were released after spending 9 months in the prison. But previously to this, Uzzaman was injected with poison and went into a coma, and all hope for his life was lost. At that point, the late Hafiz Ali implored Allah Almighty, saying, "O Lord, take me in his place." This sincere prayer found acceptance, for soon afterwards Hafiz Ali himself fell ill and died in the place of Uzzaman. Almighty Allah restored Uzzaman to health. While in Dennisley prison, Uzzaman wrote Meve Risalası, the fruits of belief, on 2 Fridays. Many of the prisoners were reformed on reading the treatise. When he was released from the prison, Uzzaman was ordered by Ankara to reside in Emirdağ. He was released in June 1944, when Dennisley Court gave the decision for their acquittal, and then spent 2 months in the Şehir Hotel. He was sent to Emirdağ in August, when the orders came from Ankara. In Emirdağ, Uzzaman was under constant surveillance, and he was prevented from having visitors. If he went out into the countryside, he was followed by police and gendarmes. One time he was approached by an official who, in domineering and insulting fashion, demanded to know why he was wearing a turban. The official took him to the police station, where he was ill-treated. He said that he suffered in 1 day in Emirdağ what he had suffered in a month in Dennisley prison. On another occasion, he put some food on the windowsill overnight so that it would not go off. Someone put poison in it, which made Uzzaman extremely ill. He was saved from certain death by saintly influence of the prayers Joshan al-Kabir, Sakina, and Salawat for the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. On the 23rd of December 1947, Uzzaman was arrested in Emirdağ and put in Afyon prison. On the 6th of December 1947, Afyon Criminal Court sentenced him on the basis of no firm evidence to 20 months imprisonment. The case was sent to the Appeal Court, which ruled that since Uzzaman Said Nursi has been acquitted of the same charges by Dennisley Court, even if the previous judgment was an error, since it has been ratified by the Appeal Court, the case cannot be retried. It quashed Afyon Court's ruling. Nevertheless, Afyon Court decided to retry the case. The defendants demanded that the Appeal Court's decision be complied with, but on the pretext of completing some deficiencies in the case, the court put the case up for re-examination. The re-examination continued for months. Having served the full 20 months of his original sentence, which had been quashed, Uzzaman was released from Afyon prison on the 20th of September 1949. These last 3 or 4 years had been truly torturous for Uzzaman. No man of learning had been before exposed to such an illegal repression. They made him suffer in Afyon in 1 day what he had endured in a month in Dennisley. In the most intensively cold days of winter, when everything was frozen up, he was left alone and untended in a large ward, most of the windows of which were without panes of glass. There was no heating of any sort. He was again injected with poison. For months he lay ill from the effects of the poison, so weak he lacked even the strength to turn from side to side. No one was permitted to come to attend him, yet he endured all the torments in patience, never cursing those responsible. Moreover, he continued to write the Risalını. It was in this prison that he wrote the piece entitled El Hujjete Zera, the Shining Proof. He also delivered his celebrated defence in Afyon Court, which, containing sublime truths, made history in court defences. He wrote the supplement for the Appeal Court. He sent petitions, statements and declaration to the Directorate of Religious Affairs and to the government and its ministries and to the police. Throughout his imprisonment, he wrote highly valuable letters and notes to his students, setting out rules of conduct and offering them advice. Parts of all these are included in the 12th, 13th and 14th rays. On the 20th of November 1949, Uzzaman arrived in Emirdağ for the second time. Here he wrote letters to the Risalını students that should be inscribed in gold. They are included in the work Emirdağ La Hikayesi. Uzzaman stayed for around 2 years in Emirdağ. Up until 1950, he had not been permitted to go anywhere from his place of compulsory residence, even to a village. Then, in 1951, he went to Eskişehir and stayed for 1.5 months in the Yıldız Hotel, meeting there with the Russalino students. He moved on from there to Isparta, where he remained for about 2.5 months when he was summoned to Istanbul to the trial connected with his work, Gençlik Rehberi, a guide for youth. He arrived there in January 1952. The case had been brought in connection with the printing by a number of students in Istanbul of a guide for youth, under Article 163 of the Criminal Code. The trial was held in Istanbul Criminal Court, but Uzzaman himself offered a splendid defence, as did the 3 defence lawyers. At the second hearing, on the 5th of March 1952, the court ruled that the defendants should be acquitted. A short time later, Uzzaman returned to Emirdağ in the summer of the following year, 1953. He moved to Isparta. Uzzaman stated that in the event of his death, he wished to be buried either in the village of Sav or in Barla. He rented a house in Isparta and together with 4 or 5 of his students transformed it into a Russalino dershane or study centre. Although he occasionally visited other places, this was where Uzzaman now stayed until he set out on his final journey to Urfa. The Afyon Court case continued for 8 years. The appeal court quashed Afyon Court's ruling that all copies of the Russalino should be seized and confiscated, following which the decision was taken to resubmit it to the scrutiny of a committee of experts made up of members of the Consultative Council of the Directorate of Religious Affairs. On their producing a very favourable report, Afyon Court ruled that the books should be returned to their owners. Thus, Uzzaman and his students were overjoyed to claim back their books, confiscated years before. In 1958, the Russalino was printed for the first time in Ankara. Sözler, the words, Mektubat, letters, Lemalar, the flashes collection, Tarhice Hayat, Uzzaman's biography, and all the parts of the Russalino were by degrees printed first in Ankara and then in Istanbul. Uzzaman said about this printing and publication, "This is the Russalino's festival. I am happy now to depart for the hereafter." Uzzaman revisited Barla, where the Russalino had first been written, after 25 years. He relived his 8 years there and saw before him his loyal friends and helpers of that time. He saw once again the places he had received divine effusions and inspiration. He could not hold back the tears when he drew close to the Medrese Nuriya, his home of 8 years, and he wept to see it again. He embraced the blessed plane tree which stands outside it, where he would offer prayers and supplications to the light of morning, and watered it with his tears. In 1959, Uzzaman visited Ankara at the request of his students and stayed for 3 days in the Beirut Palace Hotel. He called together his leading students and gave them his last instructions. He came again to Ankara a few months later and stayed in a rented house in the Bahçeevler district. This time he was visited by many deputies from the National Assembly, who sought his advice on a number of questions from the Islamic point of view. He visited Istanbul a month or 2 later. He did not remain there long. 2 months before his death, that is in February 1960, he came again to Ankara, but the Menderes government was irresolute in the face of the opposition shouts of political reaction, and they turned him back at Gölbaşı. But Uzzaman was upset at this and said it was an unfortunate decision as far as they were concerned, and he returned to Emirdağ and went to Isparta. Several days later, he set out on his final journey to Urfa. On the night of the 23rd of March 1960, that is, 25th Ramadan 1379, Uzzaman departed this life of the eternal realm and the mercy of the Most Merciful. May Allah Almighty have mercy on him and allow us to profit from his spiritual effulgence. Amen. In veneration of the Lord of the Messengers. On the 12th of July 1960, his grave was broken open and his blessed remains transported by aeroplane to an unknown spot. On his tomb are these lines. The Supplicant. my demolished grave in which are piled up 79 dead Sayyids with his sins and sorrows. The 80th is a gravestone to the grave. Altogether they weep at Islam's decline. Together with my gravestone and moaning grave of dead Sayyids, I go forward to the field of tomorrow's future. I am certain that the skies of the future and Asia will together surrender to Islam's clean, shining hand, for it promises the prosperity of belief. It affords peace and security to mankind.